Hello and welcome to PM Express. And tonight we're discussing an issue that's dear to the nation. If you do recall, in the 2012 elections, this issue was widely discussed, and I'm talking about education. Now, some say we needed free education. Others also mentioned that we needed quality education. There was a whole back and forth. Now, we've also been through a situation where many have questioned whether leaders or stakeholders in the education sector are thinking about the future of education or are just tinkering with education. Tonight we'll find out whether we need a policy redirection or we need to stay with the policies that are already in place to ensure that Ghana has the best as far as education is concerned. My name is Prince Minka. I'll introduce my guest shortly, but you're welcome to PM Express. Right, remember to join us with your messages via our various social networking platform on Facebook, Twitter, and we certainly will share them with the rest of the world. Tonight in our studios, well, of course, we are not in the studio, we are at Alisa Hotel. What a better place to discuss this issue, more relaxed atmosphere to discuss this issue of education and the way forward. I have with me Akwasi Adai Boahene. He's an education consultant and also an expert in the education sector. Good evening to you and welcome to the program. Please. And also with us is Samuel Zanakologo. He's the Executive Secretary of the National Catholic Secretariat. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Prince.
Right, so if you listen to the intro, I mentioned that education was widely discussed during the elections in 2012. Now, it goes to say that it's crucial for our development. But have we gotten the foundation right? How far do you think we have come? I'm saying this because I want to know your own evaluation of the educational sector. I'll start with you, Sam.
Okay, thank you very much, Prince. I think that education, as everybody knows, is a very important adventure for every country. If we want to think about the development of the country, if we want to think about the future of the country, everybody should be thinking about education. And so I would agree with all the different people, all the different stakeholders who have seen education as important and therefore made it an issue during the 2012 elections. But I think the important thing that we need to be focusing on is how do we deliver education in an efficient manner, education that is quality and gives us the best outcomes, and that covers everybody. That, for me, are the critical issues that we should be focusing on as a nation, but which I'm sorry to say hasn't been at the center of the debate.
But what has been our story so far?
The story that we've had is that Ghana used to be a country that delivers good quality education. But over many years now, we have been far behind in terms of what is expected of us as a country to guarantee a future of success for our children and our children's children. So for me, we have had different challenges within the sector, and there have been various attempts at addressing them, which I believe need to be discussed further because it doesn't look like we are getting it right.
Okay.
And that for me is the issue that
we'll come to these challenges one after the other, and then we can build from there. But bringing you in, Sam, do you also see it the same way Akwasi does? Because he mentions that we've come a long way. I mean, it's relevant that these debates that we saw during the 2012 elections would have come anyway. So, from where you sit, how far do you think we have come? What are the lapses?
Thank you, Prince. I think I agree with the assessment of Akwasi. Let me just repeat that in terms of the purpose of education and its criticality, that is not in contention at all. Everybody knows that education is the lifeline of national development, and so that's agreed. But how do you make that happen remains the issue. And how do you make it happen in a way that everybody is brought on board and the outcomes are also reaching out to all corners of the country and to every citizen. For example, if you look at what we have now, clearly there are issues about even the issue of equity. How do you ensure that the kind of education you want is the same in Accra, is the same in a little village in Chibrunyo, it's the same in a little village in Mbongura, somewhere in the northern region that you would not know. But that's the problem. Sometimes we emphasizing too much in the urban and peri-urban areas, and the situation in the generality of the situation is really bad. There are some places in this country where you still do not have educational infrastructure, or you have just one teacher. So there are issues like that. There are also issues of the declining discipline in our schools. So when we talk about falling standards, it's not just academic, but the generality of how education is making people able to live a life worth living, a life that is respectable. Of course, there is also the issue of how do you ensure that everybody is on board? Because education is necessarily a collaborative effort. There are many stakeholders, you know, the parents, the faith-based organizations, the government, and others. So how do you ensure that in your implementation framework, all of these actors are on board?
And that's what we're going to discuss shortly. We'll bring in, I mean, the reason why you're here especially, because you're advocating for the implementation of some educational project. We'll get into that shortly. But listening to Sam Akwasi, he mentions these challenges, and he also alluded to the same thing. And this is not the first time we're hearing it. We've been hearing of these challenges over and over and over and over. How come we've not had any substantive solution in nipping the situation in the bud once and for all?
First of all, we need to understand that in every society or in every country, education has challenges. And the challenges fall into three categories. One of the biggest challenges that every country faces the financing of education. How do we finance education in such a way?
But in our case, we keep talking about quality, we keep talking about infrastructure, we keep talking about the same thing, and this has been going on for years.
Yeah, that's what I'm coming to. It all boils down to the financing. And then the second critical aspect is the efficiency of the system. Efficiency of the system. And then the third thing is the content of education. You know, so if you want to address the different challenges that we have in education, then you need to be focusing on all these different areas. But unfortunately, we have had difficulties in addressing all these three categories of challenges. One is the resources. In this country, according to the statistics that the Ministry of Education talks about, we use over 30% of the recurrent budget of the government to finance education in this country. As to how efficiently these resources are used, we have to talk about that, because there are very few countries that do this. And so Ghana is not doing badly, Ghana is not doing badly in terms of financing, in terms of how much of our budget goes into education. We are doing very well. But the second question is, are the resources deployed in an efficient manner?
And that's where the challenge is.
That's where it's a big challenge.
That's the reason why we still have schools on the trees.
It's a big challenge, and that is why the ministry itself has identified a number of those factors. One of them is what Sam Zan just referred to, and the issue is about how we efficiently and equitably distribute the resources that are allocated to the education sector. We don't do that.
And I'm wondering how that is going to work. I mean, distribution of resources, which is at the core of all these, in as much as we want to deal with the challenges. Sam, how can that work?
Zan is my
Zan, yes. How will that work?
Maybe, you know, we can, it's about sharing ideas, and we can't be prescribing the solutions, but surely we have some ideas. That's why we think that one of the ways is to make sure that the partners who are involved in education, there is a clear arrangement, a kind of collaborative arrangement that defines the roles and responsibilities in such a way that they, you know, those who have responsibilities to deliver education at certain levels, equally there is somebody else has the role, oversight responsibility to make sure that those services meet the required standards.
But don't they have that kind of supervisory role as far as the education ministry structure is concerned?
Well, to some extent, maybe Akwasi would like to speak about that, but I want to hear speaking from the position of faith-based organization, if that were clear, for instance, the leadership of the faith-based organizations would not be pushing very much to ensure that these rules are clarified in a policy framework that leaves no room for ambiguity. For example, if that were also clear, then the ministry itself would not even be talking about decentralizing education to make sure that the decision-making is at the lowest possible level, so you can make decisions where the needs are and address them. So it's not about being very critical of the system as is, but surely we should not also be complacent to think that all is well. I don't think all is well. There are issues that we need to fix.
Okay, and you know, starting off from where you stopped, he says all is not well. So going forward, what really do we need to do?
I think that has been at the heart of the current debate within the Ministry of Education. And in fact, last June, the ministry organized the National Education Sector Annual Review, which had the theme of education efficiency. And I think that is the critical issue that we all need to be talking about. How are we going to be delivering education in an efficient manner to ensure that every child in this country gets access to education in a way that benefits that child? And I think that at the center of all this is the recommendation along the lines of education decentralization, which personally I think is the right policy direction that the ministry is adopting.
Before we get into that policy direction, let me also bring in one argument that's always been raised, and it's got to do with why haven't we got into a situation where we put the teacher first? I mean, concentration on the teacher and ensure, and using that to ensure that we have that quality that we've all been asking for. Why isn't the teacher
what do you mean? What do you mean by
I'm looking at teacher training, for instance. Teacher training schools that we have in the country. I'm looking at the conditions under which teachers function or operate. They are not the best. Day in and day out, we hear them saying that we want to go on strike because our allowances are not good. Day in and day out, we hear of teachers being posted to the rural areas, and they mention that the conditions there are not good, and that's the reason why they wouldn't want to go there in the first place. I mean, so is the teacher really at the center of education?
The teacher is, and I wouldn't want to. I want to give you the facts as they stand. You see, the decision behind making teacher training colleges not receive allowances, it's a very simple one. I'm not part of that decision, but from where I sit and from my own understanding, I think that is where we should be going, because colleges of education, as we now call them, are tertiary institutions. And every tertiary institution in this country is not paid, is not giving allowances to students. So based on just that decision alone, they become tertiary. And what tertiary students are given is access to this Ghana Student Loan Trust, where they get support from. But aside that, I would say that teacher training in this country is really, and I agree with you, that is at the center of, should be at the center of our education policy. But you see, it is not just about the training.
And you say it is so?
No, I'm just saying that it is not just being at the center. It is the issue of using the teacher resources that we have. And again, from what the Ministry of Education has been saying, we know that the deployment of teachers is rather the issue and not the availability of teachers. Because, as I speak to you, there are statistics at the ministry to show that we have over 20,000 teachers.
Where?
In places where they should not be.
Urban.
Okay.
Is that the reason? Is that the reason why the World Bank would even
listen? No, it's not about World Bank.
That teachers have been absenting themselves.
No. It's not about it's not about World Bank, it's about us.
Okay.
We generated those statistics, and we are saying that teachers are at places where they should not be. And in this country, according to the ministry, we have over 20,000, almost 27, from what at the latest I heard. I don't have the right statistics. Over 27,000 classrooms in this country where teachers don't show up, where there are no teachers. Let me say that.
And so we've known this. We don't need the World Bank to tell us this.
It's not World Bank that is there. We told World Bank.
Okay.
The country, we generate, the government has a mechanism for generating statistics. Okay. So they generate that, and World Bank just picks it. And because the World Bank is
puts
big,
it out there to the world.
Puts it out there to the world. So it is not the World Bank generating it. It's the
it is
country
us telling the World Bank
that this is the
what
problem.
we do.
This is what we have.
Okay.
And the second point is that we have also about 24,000 teachers who are in places where they should not be. And that is why I mentioned to you that one of the biggest challenges we have as a country, and which we all need to be part of addressing, is the issue of efficient use of our resources. And the resources include financial resources, human resources. Do we really need those teachers, 24,000, to be in places where they should not be, when we have 27,000 classrooms where we don't have teachers to teach?
All right.
We need to make that decision. It's a country's decision.
Very well. Zan, I'll bring up. Yes.
Well, just a little bit
a
of
quick one.
interjection. You know, that's why we also have to be careful not to overemphasize the teacher being the center of education. Because from where I sit, the child should always be at the center of education. And the teachers are the means to deliver that education. That's not to say we should not pay attention to teachers, their training, their remuneration, etc. But we should not overemphasize the comfort of teachers at the expense of children.
Child,
Otherwise, you will have the situation where teachers are telling you, I can't go to this place, this deprived area. I want to be in Tamale. But that should not be so. I mean, we all have taught before, and I started my teaching in a village somewhere in Zabzugu, in Sangba, and it was important.
How do you get fresh graduates from the various teacher training to do this? And are we having you reconcile this?
That's a different debate.
Exactly.
Let me quickly
we need
just,
to go on a quick break.
Right.
I'll have you reconcile this with, you know, the fact that you are asking that some sort of implementation be done on your education project that seeks to formalize a partnership between government and faith-based organization in education delivery in Ghana. We'll get into that after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is still PM Express here on Joy News on Multi TV, and keep your messages coming through. We certainly will share them with the rest of the world. Remember, we're on Facebook and Twitter as well. This evening, we're discussing education, and we're looking at whether we really need a policy redirection as far as our education is concerned. And like I mentioned to you, I have in the studios Akwasi Adai Boahene. He is an education consultant and of course an education expert as well in the studios. And it's been interesting. If you missed the first part of the show, you shouldn't go away because it's going to get much more interesting as we go on. Samuel Zan Akologo is the Executive Secretary for the National Catholic Secretariat. He's also here with us in the studio. And before we went on the break, I told you that the Catholic Secretariat is actually advocating for a project that seeks to formalize a partnership between government and faith-based organization in education delivery in the country. How is that going to play out, Zan?
Okay, thank you, Prince. Let me just a couple of things. First of all, I said earlier that education is a collaborative effort. And faith-based organizations, and we're doing this not just for the Catholic Church, but all the faith-based organizations. Ahmadiyya has schools, we have Islamic schools, we also have Presby, Methodist, etc. And there are also other bodies that have, schools in the basic sector who are interested in this. It's basically to define a framework that will guide how the actors play out in education, especially the basic sector. The current situation is not the best, where you cannot rule out the faith-based organizations. For example, easily 40% of the public schools in this country are managed by faith-based organizations. You know, for all intents and purposes, that's a substantive figure. You would like to make sure that those stakeholders involved in this, you know, this proportion of educational service delivery and management.
But how has, you know, that kind of involvement of faith-based organization helped in ensuring that our education system is put right? Because today we're talking about the challenges in our sector.
Well, it's about setting up the framework. After all, the faith-based organizations are not responsible in the policy direction. So it's the government that has to define the policy direction. How can collaboration be done? Yeah. That is not there. It is just left to some sort of ad hoc measures, you know, either based on ministerial directives. And there has been some ministerial directives in terms of how the partnership should work. The famous one is the 1999 Spio-Gabra statement. But after some time, all of this gets dissolved. But also rightly so, that, you know, the arrangements for general education management in this country, you know, is changing. And to the extent that these things are changing, you need to revisit all of that and make sure that the policy framework is very clear, is unambiguous, and the actors know their roles. But that's not to say that these other actors, these other secondary actors, because the first prerogative of education rests with government. No doubt about that. Nobody is taking that. But they need to set the policy framework that will define the roles and responsibilities of the other actors. If you don't do that, you create very conflictual situations at the operational level. And as I speak to you, that's happening either between managers of faith-based units and regional directors and district directors, because it is so arbitrary. And one district director decides in this direction, the other one is deciding in a different direction. That is not good for quality education in this country.
I can bring you in now.
Yeah, I would agree with him that education is a public good. And so we need all stakeholders to be engaged in the delivery of education. And therefore, as a country, we need to be able to define what will be the stakeholder arrangement within which education can be delivered. And I think that from what is happening now, we do not have things right. Let me give you a few elements of that. Number one is that government has, through the Ghana Education Service, offices in every district where we have a district director of education, supposedly to be managing education in the district. At the same time, government has a parallel system to the faith-based organizations, through the regional managers and local managers. And this structure is also paid for by government. You see, so the conflict situation that he's referring to is how clearly have we defined the different roles and the different functions of these different levels of managers? Regional manager responsible for what? A district director responsible for what? A regional director responsible for what? So in most cases, regional directors of education from the Ghana Education Service, regional managers of education from the faith-based organizations, and local managers have used their discretionary, if you like, powers to do certain things. And that has generated conflict between GES and the faith-based organization. And that is why I think it is based on that they are seeking a new partnership arrangement that will clearly define what each stakeholder will be responsible for. It will need some deeper discussion, because at the moment as we speak, there are also policy discussions around how education should be managed from at the basic level. And so if you are talking about a rearrangement of management roles within faith-based organization and government, then you need to take into account what the current policy discussions are
and going into history, I mean, there are those who would argue that in the past, when faith-based organizations were deeply involved in our educational sector, there was discipline because of the kind of teachings that children at that level, basic and even to the high school level, got. I mean, How do you think that is going to play out, in as much as we talk about this partnership and how that fits into any policy that will be formulated?
You see, I hear those arguments, and I don't disagree with them, but I think you can't simplify the issue and say that if we hand over the school to faith-based organizations, there will be discipline. The disciplinary challenges we have in this country are generational. Generational in the sense that there is indiscipline everywhere. Because at the time we're referring to that discipline in the mission schools, the public school system that we had at the time was also implementing some disciplinary measures, for which reason children who are in those schools were also very well disciplined. Even though the additional factor that the faith-based organization had was to introduce the faith and moral education part of it, which of course then strengthened the disciplinary foundations of children. But I think the challenge is that discipline generally in this country has fallen below what is expected. And that is why we're having a lot of challenges around. So I don't think, personally, that's my view, I don't know what Zan thinks, but my personal view is that by necessarily changing the management of schools will not bring about the discipline that we used to have as a country.
But I want you to clear this.
That's a very interesting opinion.
Before you go there, clear this for us.
Let me just say this very quickly and you go on. But we can also look at the situation as it is now. Clearly everybody knows that the faith-based schools, in terms of talking in comparative terms, there is relatively higher discipline in faith-based schools. Even if you talk about...
Relatively higher.
Yeah, higher. If you talk about performance...
Not absolute.
Yeah, not absolute. If you talk about performance, I mean, everybody is rushing to get the word to, a faith-based school, one or the other. Why? Because they think there is something there that provides the difference. Now, what is it? It's not to say because I work for faith-based organizations, we think we have it right. But indeed, it's important that there is a framework where we can harvest some of the good practices that are actually delivering positive, good educational outcomes. But now that arrangement is not there. You cannot simply say, we see that the faith-based schools are doing well, yet you don't have a framework that creates opportunity for these different actors to sit around the table and discuss on the issues. For instance, something as practical as that, So these are some of the issues.
And that's why I want to...
You said it's very rational, but I mean, it's not as if we should throw our hands into the sky. I think
in
we
despair.
can fix it.
But that's why I really want to know from you. I mean, as far as this partnership that you're seeking for from government is concerned, how deeply involved do you want to be, as far as our education is concerned? Do you want to take back ownership as it used to be in the past?
Oh, no, far from that. Far from that. And we are in conversation with all the faith-based organizations. As I speak to you, in June we had a meeting of all the leadership of the faith-based organizations, even including the other bodies that have public schools, the prisons, police service, the garrison units. And nobody is, of course, earlier on there were discussions about hand over our schools to us. And that was, if you like, a desperate call, because the conversation has gone on for so long and nobody seemed to care.
So now,
but as
you'd rather choose partnership than,
we want
asking that the schools be handed over to you.
And I think
but you'd have loved it if it had been handed over to you.
No, it's not about handing over. So that, at least speaking for the Catholic Church, and do what we did. They are public schools. It's not, the Catholic schools are not for Catholics.
You could whip up discipline, ensure that there's discipline.
Yeah.
And bring back, what used to be the situation in the past.
But that's not, we're not taking over responsibility from government, because if you use that road also, you would be making government to, as it were, renege on their core responsibility of providing social services, of providing education in particular to its citizens. So you can't take it away from
in this
government.
partnership, what do you expect from government?
Basically, a policy intention that makes it very clear, but also one that defines clearly the roles and responsibilities, and thirdly, one that sets out a regulatory framework so the field is not messy.
Okay.
You know.
For you coming from the point of view of an expert, I mean, what sort of policy framework can help enhance this partnership?
Yeah, I think in one breath, I fully agree with him that there's a need for a very clear partnership arrangement. Right. And I've said that all the different partners need to understand what their roles are going to be in terms of how we deliver education, in not only faith-based organizations, but even including parents and other civil society organizations. We need everybody's involvement in delivering good quality education for this country. So from where I sit and from my understanding of what the faith-based organizations are seeking to do, I think they should be seeking a partnership that grants them the opportunity to contribute to the delivery of good quality education.
Absolutely.
So that is, for me, should be the bottom line. As to what way or what their role should be, it's something that we can discuss, and I have some ideas as to what can be done. For instance, in some countries, you would realize that organizations like the Catholic
Church
Secretariat or the Catholic Church is given the opportunity to manage schools with government funding, where government agrees or sets up a capitation for each basic school child. For instance, in primary school, we know government can say, I spend 100 cedis on every child. So Catholic Secretariat, Catholic Church, you want to manage 20 schools, you have 200 children there, I'm going to give you that money, manage those schools.
And you think they'll do a better job? I mean, going back to your earlier argument, that has always been the issue. I mean, the disbursements of funds, management of funds to support education.
Any system that is set up to break down management to smaller units is more likely to deliver good results.
Okay.
And that, for me, is another reason why, personally, I think that one of the ways in which we can address all the many problems that we have in our educational sector is when we have achieved complete and absolute and efficient education decentralization. And so part of the decentralization process could be providing autonomy to the Catholic Church, for instance, to manage government schools with government funding. Government agrees on a capitation that for every child, and so if they are going to take over the management of 20 schools, just like we do for the capitation grant that we have, we know the number of schools in every district or in every school, and so government says, I'm paying a capitation of, say, 4 cedis, 50 pesos. So you have 20 schools, this is your money, manage it. That is part of decentralization, and I think that in that direction, I think the Catholic Church is going to make a lot more contribution than they are doing now. Because at the moment, their role is not clarified, and like I said, he alluded to that. There has been some conflict situations in different places because different people use their discretionary powers to make some decisions that may not be contributing to us delivering good quality education.
So the question is, how would that culminate into ensuring that we don't have a situation where, you know, say 30% of the candidates that wrote the WASSCE failed? And how would that also culminate into a situation where we wouldn't have to tell the World Bank that a lot of our teachers are absenting themselves from school? I mean, we've got a lot more questions to ask as far as this issue is concerned. Stay with us, don't go away. This is still PM Express. You're welcome back to PM Express here on Joy News on Multi TV. Now, let's move on with the discussion as we have here at Aliza Hotel. It's a very relaxed atmosphere. We're talking about an issue that's dear to our heart in this country, and it's education. Now, I'll start with you, Kwesi, on this one. Going forward, faith-based organization partnering with government. Exactly what should we be expecting? What kind of results would it yield?
Results in terms of
all the challenges that we've spoken about.
For me, like I said, education is a partnership between government, civil society, and the public, including parents. So any type of partnership that brings in all the different stakeholders is a positive one. But like we are all agreeing, the issue is not about just entering into partnership. The issue is about clarifying the role of each of the partners. What will be the role of government as the ministry, represented by the Ministry of Education? What should be the role of the Ghana Education Service? What should be the role of faith-based organizations? What should be the role of parents? We have all these defined in different ways at different times, but I don't think somebody has codified this whole arrangement.
But what would be your suggestion of what role each can play? Government, faith-based organization?
Government obviously should be looking at educational policy. What are the policy direction that we need to be adopting as a country to deliver education to the citizens of the country? And that should be the Ministry of Education's role. The Ghana Education Service, as it's established now, is responsible for implementing educational policy and also managing education policy. Within that management is where we will need to include other stakeholders, including faith-based organizations, and who are very important and who have a very positive contribution that they can make to the delivery of education. Within that same role, we need to clarify the role of parents. What should be the role of parents? For instance, through school management committees, through parent-teacher associations. All these things need to be, and I think all these things are there on paper, but in terms of practice, we are not seeing a lot of that.
And talk about parents, before I bring you in, Zan, I've heard that in other parts of the world, America for instance, parent-teacher associations are so strong that their voices goes a long way to help formulate policies.
Exactly.
So what kind of restructuring do we need, in as much as we define all these roles?
The restructuring that is currently being discussed, and which I know the ministry is pushing ahead, is under the National Decentralization Framework, where social services, including education, health, agri, are on the government's policy agenda to be decentralized. And so we believe that decentralizing education is one of the ways at opening doors for stakeholder participation, because what we are talking about under decentralization is that we are taking decision-making authority from headquarters into lower levels of government. And so you are bringing education much closer to beneficiaries. And so you are providing the opportunity for local stakeholders to participate in the discussions around education delivery.
And what would be the role of parents in this?
Parents are the ones who are the beneficiaries. If you are a beneficiary, you know what you want. So I should have a say in deciding what I think my child wants in terms of education. All right? And that is related a little bit to the contribution that faith-based organizations do. For instance, if we are a community of schools who believe that the moral education of our children is important, we should be able to make that decision, or we should be able to participate in a discussion around the content of education, such that we think that moral education is important to us, and therefore it should be included in the curriculum of education.
Okay.
You see, so more and more, if you open up for stakeholder participation, you are enriching the content, you are enriching the system, and you are enriching the delivery process. And I think that we can't get it wrong if you go that way.
Okay, so let me bring you in. I mean, what are you looking forward to as far as this partnership is concerned? I mean, you're coming from a faith-based organization,
Prince,
so
we've said it in the
your expectations will be quite high.
But it's better to, let me just tie it in with what Akwesi was talking about, the need to clarify. But let me also add what I said earlier, that the policy intention is very important. For example, Akwesi was talking about GES being responsible for the operational arrangement. Actually, you used the word management arrangement. And in that management arrangement, that's where you will have the stakeholders coming in. But I can assure you, that's not going to happen unless the policy articulation is very clear that this is the intention for educational service delivery and management. So once that articulation has been made, at the policy level, and I really hope that what I'm hearing now, that it is on the government's policy agenda to decentralize educational services. Fine, I'm not privy to the discussion, but I would say, in doing this, make sure that the policy articulation does articulate clearly the need for partnership, the need for collaboration with the different stakeholders in education. Once that has happened, and in fact you should mention them by name in the policy, which is the faith-based organization, not just Catholic, but Catholic, Presby, all those faith-based organizations and other bodies with public schools, they need to be mentioned very clearly, and that intention is clear. Once that has happened, then the issues can be dealt, the operational issues can be dealt with at the management level. But then you have a benchmark, a policy benchmark at the top that you cannot do it at your discretion. You necessarily have to do it according to the policy articulation. And also, the monitoring or oversight arrangement would be looking to see whether this is being done in effect or not. And that's why the roles have to be very, very clear. For example, my opinion is this partnership policy discussion should not be a matter for GES. No. If it has to be a policy articulation, then it should be seen to be coming from the level of the Ministry of Education. And then the operational actors would necessarily be obliged to do as the policy defines.
But what specific role would you want the GES to play?
For example, that just having the space to manage our schools in a way that will deliver the quality results that we're talking about. And now we're talking about results of ensuring that there is discipline, that children, you don't have children write exams and only 30% has passed. And when you raise this issue, again, the problem of standard, as soon as the issue comes, then you get different explanations. I have listened to different actors from GES, from Ministry of Education. Others would say, yeah, it's really not true that 30% have passed. All because people are giving different interpretations to what the standard is. I don't think that is good enough.
And so this partnership can clearly set the standards right.
Absolutely. And somebody has to be in charge. So the policy, as you talked about, government, but also that in that policy also is regulation, standard setting, and oversight responsibility. These three things are key.
Because is that what we're going to see?
Yeah, I think under the government's education decentralization plan or framework, provision is made for the participation of stakeholders. And I don't know to what extent he has seen the new Education Act that is being drafted, which seeks to combine Act 506 and Act 778 into one single act that also allows for the decentralization of education. What the policy is seeking to do under decentralization is to provide for district assemblies to take direct responsibility for the delivery and management of basic education. And when that happens, there's going to be
who handles the finances, the financial aspect of it?
All that is going to be handled by the district assemblies.
A moment ago, you advocated that the faith-based organization can do a perfect job.
Let me explain that to you. What I said is that if education is decentralized, it allows for beneficiaries and stakeholders to have more access to the delivery of education. And in that case, some aspects of decentralization includes providing opportunities for organizations like faith-based organizations. Opportunities to be delivering education. What we need to be asking, the questions we need to be asking, and which I expect that ZAN and all the other faith-based organizations that are relevant in this new policy direction that the ministry is pursuing, is to seek to understand what is being put into the new act.
Oh, but that's really so important, and we shouldn't lose time in getting this out.
So,
I am sitting here, and the first time I'm hearing that the Ministry of Education is drafting an integrated Education Act.
Yes.
That will bring together Act 778 and the other one, the older one, 506.
So how do you intend partnering with government?
If I do not know how many stakeholders would know about this, so I would invite the ministry to be, forthcoming in terms of providing this information to the public and major stakeholders, like the faith-based organizations.
You mean your interaction with the ministries? The ministry has never.
I am not. I'm not aware about this, and we would talk with the ministry, and in fact, I would be willing to say that together with the ministry, if we can create a platform for this. This proposed draft legislation.
A few minutes, Francis. Let me quickly finish. Then we can look at results.
Drafting a legislation. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that drafting a legislation is a long process.
Okay.
So it is not late. I don't think that there is time because the process has just begun. The Attorney General is putting it into legal language. It's going to go to cabinet. Cabinet will look at it. It will go to parliament.
So
Parliament will ask for memorandum
to interact and all
that. So I think that it's a process, and I think that whatever concerns they have in this process, there's an opportunity to still contribute to that.
With a few minutes to go, and I bet our viewers here in Ghana and all over the world certainly would want to know, if we have this partnership, what happens? What kind of results are we going to see? How would it, affect the trend where students at the basic level, the senior high school level, are failing in their exam? How would it affect the trend where students are beginning to use shorthand in their examination, final examination? When I talk about shorthand, it's got to do with social media, where you see students type LOL instead of laugh out loud and all that. So, moral education is needed here. I guess that's how it's going to work, but I don't know all the answers. What are your expectations in terms of dealing with all this?
Personally, any new system to deliver education should always aim at providing education at least cost and with the results required. When I talk about results, I'm talking of performance outcomes of children. So for me, this is where we all have a role to play. That in the design of the new educational delivery mechanism, which is through decentralization, we should be structuring education in such a way that at the end of the day, it will provide our children with good quality education. And that for me should be the goal. Otherwise, then there's no need, because you don't replace a system that you see as inefficient with a system that is equally inefficient. Otherwise, then leave it the way it is.
Okay.
But the way we want to look at it is to make sure that at the end of the day, education is provided in a more efficient manner, it is provided in an equitable manner, it is provided and generates the performance results that are required. But you see, again, if you're talking about performance of education, we need to also not forget that performance in our current system is because of the challenges we have in the uptake of students.
Right.
Okay. For instance, if we graduate all the number of children who sit the BAC, if we graduate all of them, I can bet you that we don't have enough senior high schools to absorb them. So that is another discussion.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to even get into that.
I just wanted to say a couple of things. Yes. In terms of results that can be delivered from this partnership.
Yes, that's what we want.
Inclusiveness. I've just told you, in this country we are having situations where in some areas you hardly would have the kind of infrastructure that is enabling for teaching and learning. And then we don't say it so openly, but we know that the faith-based organizations, most of them are those who are providing schools in the so-called deprived overseas areas. So why don't you have an arrangement that can be deepened and properly done, and then those who are doing it are properly respected? Of course, I already talked about outcomes like performance in exams, but also discipline. These are very important, and we need to make sure that the partnership arrangement would make sure that this is happening and happening very well to the benefit of our children in Ghana, because ultimately it's the children.
Right.
They are the focus of education.
Absolutely. And I would like to thank you very much for being a part of this discussion. Akwasi Adai-Boahene, it's always a pleasure having you. We should do a part 2 of this. And also Samuel Zan Akologo. Akwasi Adai-Boahene, of course, is an education consultant. And also Samuel Zan Akologo is the Executive Secretary for the National Catholic Secretariat. My name is Prince Minka, and this has been PM Express.